Hello, everybody. Welcome to From Censored to Celebrated. My name is Melita Noël Cantú, and I am so thrilled to be here with you on January 13th, 2015. This is our first episode of the year. It is a special episode because I'm featuring two fantastic guests. We are all in Austin, Texas, but as you can see, we're all in our own spaces, which is awesome. Here is Sam Killermann and Dr. Karen Rayne. So welcome to you both. Thanks again for being with me today. I wanted to just start off by saying that, as you know, this is a show where we talk about what it means to feel censored around diverse sexuality and gendered, and then how we can move that conversation to feeling more celebratory about this often very challenging topic. So I'm excited to be able to talk to Sam and Karen because they have a vast experience in this area, have done a lot of talking throughout the country and internationally, and really add to the global conversation. So I'm excited, even though we're all in Austin, Texas, we get around and we're excited to tell you some about what we're doing out in the world. So let me tell you a little bit about Karen Rayne. She's been working in education. I'm going to pull my notes over here, so I'm still looking at everybody. Karen's been working in education for the past 20 years with an expertise in sexuality education, and she has her PhD in Ed.Psych from UT Austin. Karen, is that what brought you to UT, or to Austin in general, was getting your PhD here?
Oh, no, I grew up here.
You're a native. That's right. That's right. So we have a native Austinite right here. And she focused at UT on ethics, education, and the choices that adolescent mothers made. Currently, she founded Unhushed, which helps open conversations about sexuality in the home. And she works locally in Austin with public schools, private schools. Also, nationally with the American Journal of Sexuality Education, and she's a co-chair for the National Sex Ed Conference and works with the Unitarian Universalist Association on their comprehensive sex ed curriculum. She's recently has edited an anthology, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that today. And she has also put together a show called Have You Seen S.E.X, a live sex show here in Austin, Texas, with Sam Killermann, who is our other guest. So here's Sam Killermann, who has his master's degree. Sam, where did you get your master's? I'm not seeing it here.
Bowling Green.
Bowling Green. Where is that?
In Ohio.
In Ohio. Thank you.
Yep.
I knew I'd seen it somewhere. And Sam is a multidisciplinary artist who is the person behind, it's pronounced metrosexual, and he is putting his gifts towards working for global justice. He does comedy shows performed at colleges and universities, as well as provides an awesome online resource website focusing on social justice, gender, and sexuality. And some of you may be familiar with some of his works, like The Gender Red Person. He uncopyrighted his works in 2013, and that's been something I've been featuring on a lot of the social media because I thought it was just a really fascinating discussion. I don't know how much we'll get into it today, but I thought it was really interesting. And basically, he's been authored a guide to gender. He's been working on collaborated on the all gender restrooms where you did that design, and that's been getting some worldwide traction, I hear. And you also have did a TED Talk, which we have on the social media stuff, and we're going to talk more about Have You Seen S.E.X today. So welcome to both Karen Rayne and Sam Killermann. Thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Make sure that everybody out there knows that I am tracking your comments. You can be out there with us on Twitter, be part of the conversation using the Censored to Celebrated hashtag, and you can join us on Facebook as well as Google+, and right here on the event page you can put comments, and I will see if I can work your questions and comments into our conversation. We're happy to have you. We have a lot to talk about. I have two guests. Usually this is a special episode because usually I just have one guest, but with two we've got a lot to cover, and the questions are a little bit different today, so we'll get right to it. We really debated when we were talking yesterday for our tech check-in, is this an outdated question? And we came to the conclusion that it's not. So I'm going to start our new episode of the new year with this question of, tell me a little bit about how you use the alphabet soup, what you think about it, how is it still relevant, how is it maybe not relevant in terms of LGBT or the various other ones, like I've been using DSG as in diverse sexuality and gender. So I'm curious on your take on that. And Karen, can we go ahead and start with you?
Sure. It's an interesting question, and there is a lot of conversation about whether or not it's relevant, and if we keep adding letters on, soon we're just going to have the whole alphabet, and what's the point at that place?
Right.
It's a good place to have a conversation, and when I talk with young people, what I hear overwhelmingly is that they like identifying with a group. Having a group to identify with is useful. And so there is relevancy still to it. We're expanding what that group is, and I think that that's fun and fantastic and good for identities, for it not to be so limited. You know, there's the question, why do we need to categorize? But as humans, that's what we do. We have an innate sense of categorization, and with that process, we identify more and more categories and more ways to clarify who we are and what we do and what we need and what we want and what we're drawn to. And that's all fantastic. I don't see any reason to shut that process down, but I like the continuing expansion of it instead. So for someone who identifies, oh, I'm a lesbian, or oh, I'm bi, or oh, I'm queer, or I'm genderqueer, or I'm bigender, or there's so many ways to identify, and I'm so in favor of that, and continuing to expand the number of ways to kind of get at people's nuances, and it expands conversation. It pushes our language barriers, which push our ideas of boxes, and I think it's a great process. I don't see any reason to shut that down in any way.
And so given that, is there a term that you prefer, or do you really just find that it depends on the audience or group or person you're talking with?
Oh, it entirely depends on the group that I'm talking with, and partly depends on their knowledge levels, for example. So, you know, if I'm with a group who has a pretty expansive knowledge of gender terminology and sexual orientation terminology, we can use that terminology. But with a group that doesn't have that kind of knowledge, we use a much simpler rubric for the conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's definitely kind of deepening the conversation I've been having with other guests on this show. That's awesome. Sam, what would you say? What's your kind of take on the alphabet soup? And I know you've done some writing on this too that I had initially visited when I started working on this show.
I'm very much with Karen on the sense that you really need to take the group that you're working with and let them guide the way with what language you're going to use, just in general. I think that the including letters in the alphabet soup, so to speak, has always been good because, as Karen said, there are individual identities within that whole spectrum that want to be recognized. Right. But I do get the critique that the more letters we add and the more we expand the LGBTQ, P, I, A, T, S, the more identities you add, the more you're basically marginalizing the few identities you don't include. So where do you find that happy medium? And I'm in that way,
that's the big question right there.
Yeah, it's a very fine line to walk. I liked when Q was really starting to be added to the LGBT to kind of be that overarching umbrella for the everyone left out, but I understand how that's still marginalizing. And ultimately, I like going even more broad. In the UK, I've found that a lot of people are doing GSM for gender and sexual minorities. You talk about DSGs, diverse genders and sexualities and genders. I like that for its simplicity, but it's also inherently non-inclusive. So it's just it's a line that you have to walk, and you have to decide based on the group you're working with which side of the line you're going to walk on.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. So speaking of figuring out where you are in all of this, tell us a little bit about how you each got here personally and professionally, and why it's important to you, why you feel passionate about this work. And Sam, why don't I'll start with you this time.
You know, it's funny, and I know Karen's going to mention this, but Karen and I both contributed to a book called How I Got Into Sex Ed, and it's kind of telling the stories of why a lot of sexuality educators, how we got started and where we came from. And I'll tell a different story than that because you can read that if you get the book. And I'll just say that I grew up mostly around the Midwest, and I grew up in cultures, and very much like the cultures today, where I was supposed to be a certain way. And that straying from that box or those expectations was met with, we could say, adversity or some other more harsh words. And it wasn't until I got to college that I started to understand who I was in a bit more of a deep way as it related to my gender and my sexuality. I identify as straight and I identify as a man, but a lot of other people don't get that. They don't perceive that from me. I'm constantly misread as gay. I'm misread as queer a lot, and that really freaked me out at first, to be honest. And the more I started to explore that, the more I started to realize that I'm a feminine person, and where we talk about leaning on the other, so to speak, there isn't really an other just
Sam, I think we're missing you for a
ways to
minute.
experience gender, causing a lot of people to raise their eyes. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Are we
The
back?
nature of technology. No, you're
Yeah,
back. I hear you now.
absolutely. So yeah, I guess ultimately it was just the trying to understand what other people were misunderstanding about me led me down this road. And the more I learned about gender, the more I found that I understood myself, and I understood the people with whom I was relating or talking to. And it was scary, but it was also really empowering, and it was also very affirming. And that was about a decade ago, and ever since then I've just been fascinated by gender and sexuality and the ways that they interact and the ways that they affect our daily lives. And it's something that I hope and I strive to help other people understand as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Karen, will you tell us a little bit more about the book and also how you got here?
Yeah, and actually I forgot to bring the book over here. I was going to hold it up and I was going to stroke it just to show you just what an amazing book it is. So just imagine it here.
So we just have to virtually stroke it? Is that what you're telling me?
Basically, yeah, it's very good.
This is that kind of hangout? I had no idea. This is that kind of webcam experience that we were doing together.
There you go.
Oh, not that kind of webcam.
But the book is amazing, and it's available in hardcover and as an ebook. And there's 60 people, 60 sex educators telling their stories of how they got into sex ed. And they range widely from people who came into it as adults, from people who always knew that was what they wanted to do. How fantastic is that to grow up being like, hey, I want to be a sex educator when I grow up.
Yeah.
And people who came to it through trauma and people who came to it through beauty and acceptance. So it's really
such a wide range.
It's a wide range. There's a lot of passion that comes and is clear in the book. So I'm the editor, and it was so much fun to read those stories and to get to know so many of my colleagues so much better.
Yeah.
And then some really amazing people. Dr. Jocelyn Elders is in there, and her story is phenomenal.
For people who aren't familiar with her, tell a little bit about who she is.
Oh, well, she was the Surgeon General under Clinton, I think.
I believe that's right.
And she said that we needed to start teaching sex ed in kindergarten, and was fired for it.
Yeah.
And
powerful, very powerful.
Very powerful. And, vast misunderstanding about what that means. What does sex education in kindergarten mean? Anyway, her story is fantastic, and she does great work in sex ed, and it's what she kind of continues to do a lot of work in now that she's no longer the Surgeon General. And very, deepest respect for her. She's amazing. And then some other equally amazing people, and the work they do is outstanding.
Wow.
So that's a great way for people who are looking at getting into the field, or who are in the field and want to kind of get to know their colleagues better and what brings people here more deeply. It's a great book to get and read for those purposes.
And it's just kind of fun.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say, it's just kind of a fun read too. You read one or two and then you want to read them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. This is one of my favorite parts of doing the show, is hearing people's stories about how they got here. So I can completely imagine what a fantastic read it's going to be. I'm looking forward to picking it up.
Good. And then for me, it was interesting, Sam, to hear you talk about your childhood. I came from a very liberal background. Texas. I grew up in Texas, but my family is very liberal, very opening, very welcoming. One of my mom's favorite stories is when I was 2 and took on a fight with an adult about whether 2 women can get married.
Wow.
And I was like, absolutely, 2 women can get married. This little 2-year-old, lots of toddler anger. The idea wasn't possible, and it wasn't at the time. But that's the environment that I grew up in, was very accepting, very open, very loving. And I kind of stumbled into it, really. I wanted to work with teenagers, so I feel they're a pretty marginalized group as a whole, and support them in being less marginalized. And I thought that teaching would probably be the way I'd go about it. And then sex just kind of became my content. So that is still something that's very integral to my work, is helping teenagers be less marginalized in our society.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. So it was less the content than the group of folks you wanted to work with. It sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and now I work with people of all ages in a lot of different ways, and sex is kind of a marginalized content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Regardless of
absolutely.
the age of the person, it's something that's not talked about, and so I feel like and then teenagers, as they're coming into their sexuality, need so much support or benefit from so much support.
Yeah. Absolutely. So speaking of Karen, that you were originally drawn to working with teenagers, and now I know you've expanded and you had really been interested in finding out what would it be like to do something kind of innovative for educating adults. And so can you share with us a little bit about how Have You Seen S.E.X, the live sex show in Austin, Texas that we've been talking about, and how that got started?
Yeah, there were these letters, and it all kind of started with these gigantic letters.
Physical letters, not like written notes.
No, like physical letters. If you go look at our website, haveyouseensex.com, you'll see a picture of the letters.
Yes.
And they're as tall as I am, and there's 3 of them, S-E-X, and they're lit up like Chicago-style letters, and I found them at a church.
Wow.
Obviously.
Of course.
There was a church in my neighborhood doing a series of sermons on sex, and these were the props that they had made for their pulpit. And I went to one of the sermons, and it was terrible, of course. And I was so devastated by the entire experience, and it was insulting, and it was degrading towards women, and not a sex positive experience. But the letters were fantastic, and so I left my card, and I said, "Hey, when you're through with those letters, call me." I would love to have them, so I bought them from this church.
And you've repurposed them for a very different purpose.
And now I've repurposed them for, another kind of conversation. And I was sitting around with some friends, and we were talking about what to do with these letters. I was like, I had these letters. I have to do something with them. And so we started talking about doing a performance piece with them, and, threw around a bunch of different ideas. And I was like, I really think that Sam is the perfect person to do this with me. And so I called Sam, and he was like, well, yeah, by all means, giant sex letters. You can't go wrong. So that was kind of the start.
That's awesome. And so, Sam, what happened then? What happened?
I tend to run with ideas, and it was like an idea for maybe 3 seconds before we started making it into a thing. And we worked on like what would be the format, how would we do this. One of the things that Karen and I have known each other for a while now, work and just talk about life. And one of the things we both lamented is how difficult it is living in Texas like we do, and being being minded in the ways that we are. And people here don't have access to sex ed. They really don't. And one of the things I've been frustrated by is meeting my friends who are my age here who don't understand what I would describe as like very simple, like human things, because they haven't had the opportunity to learn them. And it's such a hush-hush thing, and that's where the joke of S-E-X comes from, the way that you might spell it around a kid. And we just thought that it'd be really fun to do
word to spell. We think we need to spell it out right now. Make it really hard to figure out.
Yeah, because kids can't spell sex. That's like one of the first words they like attach to. But yeah, and like, how do you do sex ed for adults and make it elective and make it fun and make them want to go? And we put together this date night, and it was a huge experiment ultimately.
So this really comes into a question. I'm going to see if I can put it up, but if not, I'll read it to you guys. It's from one of our audience members, Rayne Dowell, and she's asking, see if I can get it on the screen. Oh, it's not letting me. Okay. She's asking, how do you educate the general public on these expanding terms so they are familiar with what these terms mean? And I think this directly goes to some of what you're trying to do with this show. Is that right? Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. One of the questions that we got the last time we did the show, so the format of the show is that Sam comes out and he starts with a comedy set, which is hilarious, and there's always education woven into everything that Sam does. And then I come out and I do some kind of question and answers where people can ask me any questions anonymously, and I'll answer them on stage. And one of the questions that I got last time was, what is queer? And I just don't get it. I just don't understand what this word is, what it means, what's the point of it, why do we have it, who identifies as that anyway? kind of a question. And so it was a great format, a great kind of platform for that conversation. And then, you know, I had a whole bunch of questions, so I answered it relatively briefly. And then afterwards, the person who had asked the question came up to me and said, you know, I would really just love to talk with you more. Can you just talk more? I don't even know what the question is. I just want more. And I was like, okay, you know, and so I talked more for maybe 10 minutes. And she was like, wow, okay, I feel like I get it now. You know, and so it's hard to find a platform where you can just talk more.
Yes. Yes, and the conversation is so important, and how do you enter the conversation and find the place to have that conversation?
Absolutely, and you know, once people are out of college, how do you get education in the first place? You know, there's news outlets and there's books, you know, but none of those are quite sexy and fun. And they, you know, in our busy lives, we really wanted a place for someone who was busy to come and have fun, and for us to still be able to do that.
Yeah. So for folks, Sam, for folks who are not in the Austin, Texas area, is there any way to access the show by webcast, or are there going to be video clips, or how? Yeah, how could they get more if they're not here, able to see it on February 6th? How do they get more?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Like I said earlier, and this is something that's just an experiment for us, and we're seeing what it is, and we're letting it grow into what it will become. We're actually going to be doing it on the road at least once this spring. We'll be in Iowa.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah, of course. And we'll be performing at the Governor's Conference. They're so progressive in Iowa.
They are, and so for those of you in Iowa, be on the lookout.
Yeah, we'll be at the Governor's Conference for LGBTQ issues, and that's something that we would love to do more of. We tried to make the show as accessible as possible. We wanted to record it. Our video recording technology, for the most part, failed, so we don't have any good, like, long clips. But one of the examples of trying to make it accessible for the second end of the show, we had an ASL interpreter, so the deaf community could come and participate. And any ideas that people have, I mean, I don't know that much about live streaming stuff, but I think that Karen and I would be open to anything, that any ideas that people send out to us. And the idea will just keep growing into whatever it is. And one thing that we would love to see is people doing this, like just copying what we're doing in other cities, because we can't be everywhere, but we can at least provide some experience with what's it take to produce something like this, and what would it take for you to do it yourself, because it's a fun, people had a blast.
That's a fantastic idea. Kind of how do you franchise this in a way to make it accessible?
Yeah.
Because so many adults do say, I don't even know how to talk to my kids because I don't know about for myself.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things about the show was Karen actually Googling things for people on stage. Like, that's a thing. Like, we know how people are even afraid to Google these questions because they're afraid of what's going to come up. So it's like very much trying to put the power in the hands of the people there, let them have fun, but we can talk about sex in a positive way, in a sex positive and queer positive way. Those were two huge goals for us, is to not shame anybody for the way they engage in sex or for the people they are. And that's something that's very doable, and you can have fun doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this really brings up for me, and I want to just skip to this question, then we'll get back to a different question. Go a little bit out of order, but really brings up for me of, like, clearly you're trying to bring this conversation out of a censorship place and bring it to people in a different way that's much more celebratory. Are there other examples in your personal, professional lives where you've experienced that, or would you say this is kind of one of the main places you've really been working with that idea of going from censored to celebrated? Karen, what do you think?
Well, let's see. I was thinking about this question and my experience with censorship, and probably my biggest experience with censorship was with my children's school. It's a little ironic because I go into schools and do sex education. People hire me to come and do that, but their school was not appreciative of my work, shall we say?
Interesting. Yeah. And what kind of is it a public school, a private?
It's a private school.
Private school. Okay.
And it's the private school that I went to when I was a child. So
wow. So you had
there's a lot of emotional attachment there, you know, and so they were not appreciative at all. And asked me to never talk about my profession on campus.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. That must have been challenging.
It was very challenging, you know, and so it was very challenging. And I would not say that I have quite made the crossover to being celebrated yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, I think I'm more tolerated now.
Okay.
You know, but
are there things that you felt like you were able to do to make yourself feel more celebratory about these topics in that space? Was that at all possible just for you as a sexuality educator, or is that even challenging because of the kind of heaviness of the censorship?
You know, I kind of let go of it.
Mm-hmm.
I had to really let go and just say, you know what, that's not my place to do my work, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I will continue to do my work, and the parents who are interested in accessing my work know me.
Right.
And, you know, if you're Facebook friends with me, you know what I do, and you know what I say and what I think. And those particular parents who are interested, they come and find me.
It's almost like you've been able to move the conversation a little bit and just kind of be like, you know what, my conversation's happening over here. You know how to find me. And that's a way for you to be,
It is, you know, and I do see movement over the last 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from when things kind of blew up to now, and things are much more relaxed. And so I see that there might come a point at which I would be celebrated in that space. But I've kind of taken my party and moved it elsewhere.
Yeah. And it sounds like some great parties going on. So, Sam, what about you? What have you noticed for yourself around moving from censored to celebrated?
I think one of the biggest things outside of SEX, which I think, as Karen said, is like one of our best parties. It's us taking something that is very censored and turning it into like the most fun, fancy, in the spotlight thing we could make.
Yeah.
I think that theme kind of weaves together a lot of what I do in a really subtle way. As a person with the identities that I have, I've been told over and over and over again that I'm not supposed to care about the things that I care about.
Because of your identities as a straight cisgender man.
Yeah, as a straight cis white guy, I've been taught that social justice isn't my fight, and that these are other people's problems, and that I need to just do me and let other people do them, kind of. And as a kid, growing up as a boy, the last thing you should do is question your gender. I mean, or your sexuality. I mean, both are tantamount to social ridicule. And I didn't talk about those things growing up because I knew I wasn't allowed to. I was told I shouldn't want to, and I was told that, and I was taught repeatedly in different circumstances that if I did, I would be ostracized at best. And in the work that I do, I very much try to own my identity and let people know that I have a gender and I have a sexuality, and we all have genders and we all have sexualities, and that these conversations are things that everybody should be having, and that I come from a place, I know my story and I know where I'm coming from, but I've finally gotten to the place where now, like the way that I dress, the way that I act around new people, the way that I am with my friends and especially my family, I don't feel inauthentic. And in a lot of ways, it's been, especially after college, when I started doing my own thing and I had my own job and I wasn't working for somebody else where I could lose all those things, a slow path, letting things out in little bits and testing them, and finally just kind of embracing that this is who I am and these are the things I care about and this is the type of person that I am. And the nice thing is it's been met for the most part with a very warm response in both my personal life and kind of publicly. So
fantastic. It's interesting too. It sounds like both of you have really kind of created your own venues in a sense of defining your own conversation and using your own skills and talents to feel celebrated in that conversation and to celebrate other people. And I know, Sam, you use social justice comedy, and Karen, you use your educational background, you know, and really understanding the technicalities around sexuality and gender, and with different populations. And I just think it's fantastic how you both have been able to do that. And I guess I wonder, what does it mean for somebody who is working a 9 to 5 job and can't kind of define their own space to do this? Maybe in their personal life they can, but professionally, how would they do it if they were kind of in a more systemic place, like a university setting or a therapy practice or something, where it might be more constrained? Any ideas on that? Just advice on that front, Karen?
That's a hard space. And, I stand out in more conservative settings. I have purple hair and I have tattoos and
I almost wore purple today because of the purple hair. I have to say. Love it.
Every day should be a purple day.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And it's hard even if you're just walking around. I had a man come up to me a week ago and asked me why I gum up my hair. And he said, "You're such a pretty girl. Why do you gum up your hair that way?"
Oh, yeah.
I was like, well, it's not gum.
You have a very different understanding of hair care than I do. That would be a disaster.
Right.
And then I had a parent call me last week to talk about her daughter and how she doesn't want her daughter to dye her hair blue because then all the parents at her kid's school would think her daughter's a freak. And I was like, oh, it's good we're on the phone and not in person because this conversation would be really different, but let me tell you, purple hair. So there is just being yourself is hard, and finding the ways that you can do that work in whatever system or structure that you're working in, whether that structure is just culture at large, or whether it's a workplace, or whether it's your religious home or your family of origin, whatever structure and system you're working in, finding out how you can be authentically yourself without breaking the system is a struggle.
Yes.
If you don't fit authentically into that system from day one. And everyone's going to find their own paths on that. My path was to kind of slowly build my own space, and it sounds like that's very much what Sam's path was as well. That's not the path that everyone chooses to take. But I do think that speaking your truth is absolutely necessary and worthwhile.
It's
And
worth having a conversation.
It is. The conversation is necessary, but not an easy one. I just started watching Transparent yesterday.
Oh, okay.
They do a really interesting job of starting to negotiate some of that context and some flashbacks for the parent who's transitioning, looking back on that person's life, living as a man in a university setting, identifying as a woman, and the struggles that go with that, and the struggles that went with that in the 70s, even larger than they are now.
Right, and just for those who don't know, this is a show on Amazon Prime called Transparent, which is based on a real-life story of someone who grew up as a man and had children and then came out to her family as an adult, and is doing that transition on the show, and it won a Golden Globe, so it's a really big year for trans folks and for what's happening in media right now, too. I think you're right. It's a good example of what happens systemically and what we can see in somebody's life. So, yeah, I am aware that we are at 1:33. My gosh. Okay, this is the exciting part about having two guests. I know we're a little bit over. I do have one more question that I think is super exciting because it's about the conference that you both recently went to and that Karen was the co-chair of. So if you're able to stick around with us for a few more minutes, Karen and Sam, is that okay if we stay on for a few more minutes?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic, and we had talked about that, so I'm glad that's still working for your schedules. So yeah, tell me, and I'm going to start with Sam. I know you were an attendant. You attended the conference, and were you also part of it? And tell me a little bit about how you were part of it, and what was an aha moment for you at the National Sex Ed Conference?
I attended the National Sex Ed Conference this year. I was one of the keynotes last year. Well, I guess last year now, because this was technically last year.
Right.
But it was one of the conferences I just went to for my own professional and personal well-being. And
fantastic.
I don't want to. I know what Karen's gonna say, so I don't want to say the same thing that she's gonna say. But I'll say that whatever she says is the same for me.
Actually, I would love to hear your perspective of it, Sam. So go ahead and steal my thunder.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm trying to keep the talking time even, so I would have started with Karen
okay.
because she is the co-chair, but I think it's neat to see a perspective of someone who was just there as a participant.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun. It was one of the first conferences I've attended in a long time as a participant as opposed to as a speaker. And one of the big conversations in the sexuality education field that's also in the national conversation is the issue of racial justice. And there have been a lot of examples of racial injustice in the field of sexuality.
Oh, we're missing you here.
And it was something that in behind the scenes conversations, oh, sorry.
Oh,
we good now?
You're back, yeah.
Okay. So that conversation of racial justice that's been happening on the national level was also happening within the field of sexuality education. And one of the things that came from the conference was a solidarity statement on racial justice in sexuality. And one of the things for me that was really powerful was seeing that being talked about in back channels on email for about a month leading up to the conference, and then at the conference actually participating in and just supporting the idea of this statement being something that sexuality educators who chose to could align themselves with and say that we recognize that there are these problems and they're big, but we're unifying to address and solve them together. And if we don't acknowledge them, we're never going to do anything about them. It was a really powerful moment, and seeing, like, there was this moment for me where a group, the Women of Color Sexual Health Network, announced the statement, and people just started walking up, and as the statement was being read, basically physically standing with the statement. And Karen, I don't know how many people total, but maybe 100 or so people actually walked up to the front of the stage, 50 to 100 people. And that was a really powerful moment. I was recording it on my phone, so I didn't want to walk up, and that's kind of illegal. I wasn't supposed to be recording it, but we'll keep that a secret. But it was a really powerful moment.
Good job.
Yeah, sorry, Planned Parenthood. I'm sorry about the video. Yeah, it was really good, though. It was a huge, powerful moment, I think, for all of us.
Sounds like you really wanted to witness it and be present for it. I mean, and to record it for posterity. Yeah, it's like a history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Gets out. That's
and
awesome.
Actually, it was officially recorded as well, Sam. So,
oh, good. Okay. I was doing it just in case.
The Women of Color Sexual Health Network Tumblr account has the video up on it, and so is the first post. I think it's pinned to the top, so that's the best place to go. It's
and we can go ahead and post that on the
okay, great.
Yeah, say the website again, just so people know.
WOC sexualhealthnetwork.tumblr.com.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I will definitely post that up after the show. But wow, I'm glad that was recorded, so it's not just Sam's bootleg there.
Easy. My bootleg is still pretty good. It was
I'm sure.
A few days later, yeah. DVDs.
So Karen, what about you? Was that moment the kind of the aha moment for you? Was there some other piece, given that you were also an organizer of this event?
That was a really pivotal piece, that whole conversation. And so, for me, I was working on that moment where the recording happened and where the statement was made, and I was working in support of the Women of Color Sexual Health Network and talking with them and talking with other attendees at the conference and how to really format that moment, because it came very organically. This desire to have this conversation and a statement of solidarity from the people in the field who wanted to align themselves with it came very organically. And so it wasn't something that was planned before the conference. It was something that arose there. It was the first day of the conference was the day that the Eric Garner non-indictment happened, and it was very nearby to where the conference was being held, and so we were right across from New York City, and it was lots of conversation and trauma that people were experiencing around it.
It felt
around race.
Felt very local, as well as it being a national conference, but it was very local given the proximity geographically.
Yeah, and so kind of helping nurturing that conversation in such a way that gave the platform to the Women of Color Sexual Health Network. I was really, really happy to be part of that and be supportive. And then leading up to that moment, and that was a beautiful and powerful moment. And we also created kind of a wall hanging.
Oh, I think I saw an image of this, yes.
of the statement, the text of the statement, that people then came up and signed. And that was also this very visually beautiful thing.
Do you have a picture of that I could link to? Because I do remember something and thinking how powerful that was.
I do.
And we can do that. We can do that after. But it brings to mind, because this is one of the things for me about sexuality and gender conferences, or conferences in general, is that they're physical things so often.
Yeah.
And so not everybody can be in the room who might want to be in the room. I mean, I know for me, being in Austin, I don't always get up to New Jersey much as that would have been really fun. So is there a way to connect to signing that online, or has it gone beyond the conference and taken on a life of its own at all?
That is the goal. It has not happened yet, to my knowledge, but that is the goal, for that to be something that people can sign. The full text of it is available at the Women of Color Sexual Health Network Tumblr account, and so you can see it there in its entirety.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, and just simply reblogging it or posting it to your Twitter or your Facebook and standing in solidarity is at the very least something everybody could do right now. And I've seen a lot of people doing that, which was really encouraging.
Great. So yeah, and I'll go ahead and get those links up on the event page and on the Censored to Celebrated pages, so we can get that word out there. That's fantastic. I definitely stand in solidarity with that work as well, and I'm so glad to hear it happened in that forum of national sexuality educators. It sounded just such a powerful moment, so thank you both for sharing that. Anything else that we need to cover? It is now 1:41. Yay! We're at, yeah, we did it, and I'm really excited to see Have You Seen S.E.X? Remind me again when it's happening. Sam, can you do the honors for us on that front?
6th and 7th of February. I'm actually bad with details, so maybe Karen would be better on this.
It's the weekend before Valentine's Day. That's the most important thing about the weekend. Is it's the weekend before Valentine's Day, and it's at here in Austin at El Tiempo Dance Studio, which is near Congress and Old Wharf. Tickets are up online at haveyouseensex.com. You can buy them through Eventbrite on that website. I don't know.
And I know you had some. Well, that's okay. And I had posted it too, so I know folks can find it there. But I know you had said something about there's a VIP ticket. What does that look like? That was intriguing.
There is a VIP ticket. We are still, I think, talking about what the VIP
great
ticket means, but it's going to be great, whatever it is.
Okay. No, that's great though. So something to be on the lookout for and to check back.
Sit up front at their own little tables.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And your last show was in July, correct? It was a July show. So this is nice. It'll be a winter show, which is great. So that'll be and pre-Valentine's.
Yeah. So we're talking about romance and sex. I think is going to be our theme here. We have. Sam and I, we haven't been, I think, communicating this very well, but we have themes that we're kind of working on for each kind of set of shows.
Right.
And so, when we did it for the first time, our theme was our first time. And so we talked about first-time sexual experiences.
Right.
And I told some really embarrassing stories on stage to a group of people that I don't think my mom would be happy about.
Okay, so are there any bootlegs out there of that? Since I had to miss it.
On sale on the corner of 34th and Massachusetts and New York with my other bootlegs. Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap. Speaking of which, let's wrap up. What's other than going to haveyouseensex.com, what's a great way to get in touch with each of you, either social media, websites, what works for you guys? Karen, you want to let us know where we can find you?
Sure. I have my website that really talks about my work with parents and teenagers here in Austin is unhushed.net. My trainings and work with professionals mostly housed at KarenRayne.com. The Sex Ed Network and the Sex Ed Conference, you can find them at sexednetwork.com and sexedconference.com.
Good.
But really KarenRayne.com is kind of a hub of where you can find most of what I do.
And I know you're on Facebook kind of as your main social media, is that correct?
Yep.
So people can find you there. Good. And Sam, what's best for you? How can people find you?
I'm pretty easy to find on social media. Most social media /Killermann with 2 N's is my account. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of that. Website-wise, my main website is itspronouncedmetrosexual.com, but you could also go to samuelkillermann.com that has just links to all of my other projects. At any given time, I have a dozen or two projects in the works, and I'm always trying to make new things, and that's kind of where I keep people updated on those things as best I can. I'm trying to get better about it, and where I'm going to start asking for help when I need help on projects, because I'm realizing more and more that the work that I'm trying to do and my goals are only going to be better served by reaching out more to the communities that I'm creating. So if you want to help, let me know, and I'd love help.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your brilliance with me and your excitement about this work. It's just been a great way to start the new year, and there have definitely been a lot of challenges ending the last year. With Transgender Day of Remembrance was a really big, heavy thing for me last year, and so it's just so great to think about. There's this exciting new show that we'll be getting to see focusing on romance and sex here in Austin, and maybe some ways we can figure out to do some webcasting or live streaming around that. I would
That'd be great.
More about that. So, speaking of help, it's something I love doing. So, fantastic. Well, thank you both again, and thanks to everybody who joined us in the audience. I know we had some folks far and wide listening in, and we're really grateful that you were able to join us. And please do, if you have any questions or follow-up, you can follow up with Sam or Karen individually, but also you can ask on the comment page, and we'll be on for a few minutes after answering questions. So until we meet again in later in the next month or so, when I will be announcing my next guest, please celebrate all the people in your life and have a wonderful January and start to your new year. Bye, everybody. Bye, Sam. Bye, Karen.
Bye.
We're going to continue broadcast. Stop broadcast.